My guest today is Matt Gore with Optio. Matt was a BCG consultant and startup founder with the Saturn Five Venture Studio. Along the way, he got hooked on crafting stories that help founders raise money, and so now he manages Optio, a firm that specializes in crafting pitch decks. Optio pitch decks have helped founders raise over $2 billion in capital from top firms like Andreessen Horowitz. Matt is a partner in several service-based businesses. He's an active angel investor and currently leads the Aggie Venture Fund, which is a student VC fund associated with Texas A&M. Matt, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Very much looking forward to our conversation. I think you have a really interesting window into the early stage investing ecosystem, given your work with founders over the years. Our objective today is really to pick your brain and understand your perspective on how angels think about early stage investing. As an investor yourself, managing the VC fund, I'm sure you've got a lot to say on that topic. And so we'll get there later on. Before we dig in, I'd love if you could just share a little bit about your background. I know you're a big storyteller, so I'd love to hear kind of the Matt Gore story up to this point.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I'd say that this is really an accidental job. I did not ever think that making pitch decks could be or should be a job, and certainly not a job that's big enough to keep me busy full time. But I just made pitch decks on nights and weekends for years for friends and for other folks in the Austin tech ecosystem until I kind of realized that I'd been making quite a bit more money doing that for multiple years than I had at my day job. And so at the time, I was working at a B2C consumer SaaS business. And I realized that there was a chance for me to do something really different that I actually really deeply enjoyed. And so I started Optio 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And now we have a team of 8 people. And this is all we do. So it's been really interesting for me to discover a market that I didn't think existed before I got into it.
I love that. Was there a specific moment or like tell me the aha moment for you that made you realize, oh, you know what? This is the thing, not the day job.
Well, I'll give you two. One is an aha, and the other is a kick in the ass. So the aha was when I quoted somebody a price and they didn't blink and said yes. And for the first several years, I just would double my price after every pitch deck, and people kept saying yes. The first one I did for free, the second one for $100, and then we got up into the $25,000 range. And I thought, dear Lord, why are people paying this much? And I realized that it wasn't my time people were paying for, it was their time. And so if you are the partner of a fund, that guy has can do really valuable things with this time. And so he would say, yeah, I don't want to spend the next 2 weeks, 60 hours or so, which is pretty typical for a pitch deck. I don't want to spend 2 weeks of CEO time doing this. And so it wasn't my time that was valuable, it was the CEO's time or the fund manager's time. And that really was an unlock for me. Oh, and by the way, on pricing, we've now switched our pricing so we can get up into the $25,000 range for a really big raise, but our bread and butter is in the $10,000 range. But the other moment was my wife. So first day back from the honeymoon, I said, okay, honey, goodbye. A client was bothering me all during our honeymoon saying he really wanted help with a pitch deck. So I'm going to stay up all night and make a pitch deck. My wife looked at me and said, no, you're not going to do that. You get to have one job. You do not get to have two jobs. And when your wife, who is a surgeon, not famed for having a good work-life balance, tells you you're working too much and you need to focus, that's a pretty good indicator that it's time to do something.
That's amazing. What was the like time delta between that kick in the pants and the transition?
3 to 5 months, I think. It was pretty
Okay, so
fast.
pretty quick.
We started Optio, I guess, less than 6 months after I got married. And my wife was still in medical school. And so I, again, kind of told her, are you crazy? I'm going to start a business and you don't have any income. In fact, you're going to expensive school.
Mm.
And she said, you'll be fine. You'll make plenty of money. Don't worry about it. And I'm still
Wow.
confused by that. I don't know if it was brilliance, blind faith, or something else, but she was much more confident that this company would work than I was. So I
Mm.
said, okay, I'll try it for 6 months. And the day before I quit my job, I got an email from an old client saying, hey, I need a pitch deck. So I said, okay, let's go. And then we've been almost fully booked the whole time since then. There's probably been a month and 3 years when we were under, when I didn't sell enough to keep the whole team
Wow.
busy.
So during the last few years, like how many decks have you made?
Oh gosh, I have no idea.
Rough
Yeah,
estimate.
hundreds.
Hundreds of decks in just a few years.
Yeah, hundreds of decks. Everything from deep sea mining to power harvesting in space, from LP decks to sort of pure play VC. I mean, we've done just about everything, which is
Mm.
really fun. It's really fun for me. And the reason I think I love my job is because effectively my job is to ask really dumb questions of really smart people. And then my advantage over an investor is that I'm kind of like their defense lawyer, where they'll tell me, yeah, I hid the bloody knife over here. They'll tell me about their
Mm.
problems because they don't think I'm going to write them a check. I write the occasional check, but they're helping me spin their story. And so I get to hear the sort of raw, honest answer and the doubt and the messiness before we come up with a really polished answer that sounds like everything's put together, even when it's
Mm.
not.
I love that. I mean, you got the golden ticket to due diligence for all of these
Yes.
companies, it sounds like.
Yes. I mean, people tell me what they're scared of, what they think, why they think they'll fail, what the real problem is. They tell me the real answers a lot of times, which is really interesting.
Wow. Okay, well, I have a bunch of questions about that. Before we get there, though, I want to make sure we wrap up kind of your background, what you're currently working on. So, Optio is your main focus, it sounds like. What else are you working on?
Yeah, besides Optio, I teach Aggie Venture Fund, which is sort of a college class. It's kind of a college seminar that got taken over by Shark Tank. And so in Aggie Venture Fund, we have startups that me or my co-professor Evan Loomis are looking at for potential investment. They come and pitch over Zoom for every class. So we have 1 to 2 pitches a class, and the students analyze the deal. And Evan and I write checks into some of the companies. We don't make a ton of investments into that, but we will make investments as a part of Aggie Venture Fund. Evan is a full-time practicing venture capitalist with a focus on critical industries, which becomes sort of anything that you need to beat our opponents in sort of the looming next generation Cold War. And so we kind of skew towards a little bit of deep tech and defense tech in the class. And then my portfolio is a little bit more chaotic, where I'll come in with anything that I've seen. A lot of times that comes to me initially as a client for my services company.
Mm, love it. And that was one of my other questions is how would you break down kind of your portfolio and your typical opportunity that's interesting?
I am very opportunistic, which is the kind of word I would use in a pitch deck to hide the fact that I have zero discipline or focus within my investment portfolio in terms of startups. Generally, what I want to do is find something that I think where I really, really love the founder startup match. I think that's
Mm.
my biggest criteria. It's almost all in pre-seed or seed. It's when I do almost all of my investing. I don't usually touch anything beyond that. And I'm trying to find something where I really believe the founder is a force of nature.
Mm.
Now, I'm not sure that I have to be very careful about angel investing because, like a defense attorney, I do a better job when I convince myself my client is innocent. I do a better job
Mm.
making a pitch deck when I convince myself that it's a unicorn. And so I often try to get high on my own supply and to really
Mm.
believe in a company. And so I often make myself have a cooling off period where I try to make sure, wait a second, was that me convincing myself this is a good idea because I was trying to convince other people this is a good idea, or do I really believe in this? And so I try
Mm,
to take a little bit of space away from it before I come back and write that check. The challenge is that I am not valuable enough to the hottest startups for them to make space on their cap table for me.
mm,
And so I think that's one, uh, and that's something I tell my founders all the time is I say, do not take money. Do not take any dumb money. Don't take money from anybody who only
mm,
brings money. And for most startups, I am effectively the dumbest of money. And I think most angels fall in that category where even if you're a good investor, what are you really going to do to move the needle for that group? And so what I'm thinking about doing is saying, hey, I'm going to keep writing checks. I'm going to keep trying to grow my pattern recognition. But if I want to be a truly great investor, I need to be a truly great value add in the ecosystem. And
mm,
that's what I'm focused on becoming somebody who is a massive strategic advantage to have on your cap table. And I think that's what's going to ultimately make me the best investor is not picking them, but is being able to win them.
mm. I love that perspective shift because that stands in such stark contrast to many investors' perspective where they feel like they have the power and it's all about picking the winners. I love that contrast of winning the winners. I think that's a really, really interesting comment.
Yeah. So today I met with two different entrepreneurs um, talking about their early stage business plan. One is a first time founder, and there were about 4 or 5 massive problems with what they were doing. The other person I talked to had founded a unicorn that is currently worth about $3 billion.
Mm,
Okay, how did those two people approach their thought about fundraising? One said, I guess I would need some money, so I should probably raise money. The other person said, I think I could, by getting this particular set of 15 to 20 people on my cap table, I can massively shift the odds of success.
mm,
That was a guy who's created billions of dollars of value.
mm.
That is a completely different perspective on fundraising.
100%. I think that leads into some of the focus for today. So, thinking about the average angel investor, typically has some measure of professional experience, oftentimes an entrepreneur themselves that's exited and is now looking to give back to the ecosystem. They're a CXO somewhere. What are some of the mistakes that you typically see angels make when it comes to evaluating a pitch? Maybe specific to the pitch deck, but just holistically, like what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see in the angels that your entrepreneurs are interacting with?
I would say this is I have an unusual answer, which is that 90% of the time, a pitch deck in a pitch is a very good approximation of several things. It's a very good approximation of the founder's ability to recruit, to sell, and to recruit and sell fundamentally. A really good pitch deck. Storytelling is very important as a founder, especially a founder trying to really change the world. And if you can't tell a compelling story, if you can't uh, create a compelling vision of the future, then the chances that you're going to be able to hire that 10x engineer or close that first deal when that first contract when your MVP is really minimally viable, when it really sucks, it's very small. And so I think that pitch decks are a good approximation for those things. So I think extrapolating from the success of a pitch to saying that was a terrible pitch, there's no way I'm writing a check. I think that's right 90% of the time. But of course, we're in the outlier business. We're in the business of trying to find those times when everybody else is passing, but you're getting to yes with conviction. And so I think there is a set of founders, especially very technical founders, who simply don't know how to play the game, who are incapable of giving a compelling pitch, but who could become truly world-class founders with really great businesses. And so I would say that I would have some forgiveness for bad pitches for very technical founders. I think, one set of founders in particular, one founder in particular, um, they had a very dense, very technical deck that wasn't getting any traction. I worked with them. I helped them reshape it. The company has since gone on to be very, very successful, and at its last round was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The real problem was that the founder was speaking as an engineer to other engineers and couldn't communicate the jump about the economic value they were creating. And so I worked with them to help do that. But if there's a founder who really does have the right background, who really does have the right kinds of experiences to be a phenomenal founder in the space that they're pitching you, but you say, I just do not see the economic story here at all, I would spend some time trying to understand what that is with the founder, because they probably know it. They probably just don't know how to say it.
So you're saying that 90% of the time, the deck is a pretty good, and like the pitch experience is a pretty good approximation of an entrepreneur's capacity to sell, win projects, and your gut feel, almost observing a deck presentation, is pretty spot on for the most part. However, you're pointing to perhaps a gap in the market where, particularly for technical entrepreneurs, early stage investors tend to perhaps unfairly exclude those opportunities from consideration, when the reality is that it might be a brilliant opportunity, just not with the pretty packaging and skill set that you would typically see. And so you're pointing to essentially angels miss out on great opportunities because sometimes great opportunities are not bubble wrapped.
Yes, precisely. I would encourage investors to 9 times out of 10 do not tolerate a bad pitch. But if you are going to tolerate bad pitches, I would tolerate them from technical founders. And then that a really technical founder may have a great company and a terrible pitch.
And
Every
when you say
time
technical, sorry to interrupt, when you say technical founder, can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that?
a PhD, somebody who's an engineer, a PhD or an engineer, I think those are the times where you say, okay, there might be something more underneath here.
Mm.
Now, and I'm saying like a very technical engineer, but I think PhD is probably the right use case. Most of the time, PhDs cannot talk to real humans about what they do. And so I've had to learn to ask very silly questions like, how will you make money? Or
Mm.
how would you explain this to your grandmother? Except one time I asked a PhD physicist, how would you explain this to your grandmother? And it turned out his grandmother was also a PhD physicist.
Of
So
course.
that's a sign he's probably onto something, though, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. So you said, I like what you said, 9 times out of 10, you would tell an investor to not tolerate a bad pitch. I'm gonna open the box here. Help me understand what the difference between a good pitch and a bad pitch is in your perspective.
I often tell founders that my job is to advocate for the dumbest person in the room. Don't use acronyms. Don't give me the 10 facts that are interesting. Give me the one fact that's really compelling. I think that if you've seen a bunch of YC founders pitching, they all do a pretty darn good job, even when they do have PhDs. Why? Because they know the right people. They're in the tribe, they're in the club. And the, that's a really valuable proxy. If you don't know the shibboleths, if you don't know the lingo, if you don't know how somebody does something, then you probably also don't know investors. You probably also don't know great engineers. You probably also don't know what the latest, greatest B2B SaaS sales engine is. And in fact, you probably need to know those things if you want to win. And so I would say that pitches are actually good proxies. They're good proxies of your connectedness to the tribe and culture and best practices of Silicon Valley. And they're also a good proxy of how compelling you can be in a meeting to get somebody to make a decision in your favor. If you really struggle when you ask people to give you money, you're probably also really going to struggle when you ask customers to give you money, or when you ask engineers to not work at Google and to come work for you for 10% of the salary and some equity. And so I think that pitches are good proxies of those things, of being in the tribe, knowing the right people, knowing the right rhythms, knowing how things work, of sales and of recruiting. And if you don't know Silicon Valley, if you don't know how to sell and you don't know how to recruit, I would say the chance of you building a successful business as a co-founder is very small.
So for a new investor, let's say I'm an angel, I've made a couple of investments, but I'm just really starting to get plugged into the early stage investing ecosystem. How do I suss out the difference between a great pitch and a subpar pitch? Because to me, everything seems exciting and new, and these entrepreneurs all have lots of energy. What are some of the indicators that you point towards for newer angels evaluating pitches that are coming in all kinds of formats, right? They're getting written pitches, they're getting, deal flow newsletters, they're getting in-person pitches, sometimes virtual pitches, demo days, pitch events. I mean, there's so much pitching happening all the time. It's difficult for a lot of investors to sort through what's great and what's not. What do you look at to help them suss out good versus bad?
I would say that most angel investors should not be angel investors. They should put all of their money in the S&P 500 and work on their golf game. But if you're an angel investor who's going to ignore that advice, so you don't know what you're doing, but you're going to do it anyways, one thing I would suggest is um, do they I would be searching for two things. One, do they have really thoughtful responses to the not just the first question you ask, but the second or third follow-up question you ask? I would consider I don't know, let me get back to you as a very thoughtful answer, as long as they actually get back to you. And so I think that for both of these companies I talked to this morning, right? I talked to two founders this morning. One very successful, already founded unicorn, the other one first time. I had ideas that I think were pretty valuable for both companies. One of them immediately became part of the roadmap. The other one is a maybe, right? I'd be very curious if in 2 weeks the first founder had done the two or three things that I suggested and come back to me and said, well, it turns out one of those ideas is terrible, but one of those other ideas is great, and we're running with that. That would be a really good indication of me of the potential for growth, because most founders do not have everything, do not have the capacity to run a great business yet. But some of them are learning machines who can quickly grow into that. And I would be interested in looking at their ability to listen, take on some ideas, because some ideas are bad, but take on some of those ideas and test them, execute, etc.
So the entrepreneur's responsiveness to questions, the way that they receive feedback, receive coaching, are some of the key elements that you would point to differentiating a great from a subpar
Yes.
opportunity,
Yes.
essentially.
And I would say one of those things is their depth of thoughtfulness around the business itself.
Mm.
I would be a little bit concerning if you ask a question that the entrepreneur hasn't already thought about. And so it could be, hey, I know of something that you don't know of, right? I worked with a set of founders who I knew about a success in their space they didn't know about. And it's like, this is not a gigantic space. You hadn't heard of the only successful startup in your space in the last 5 years. That seems
Mm.
like it's a red flag, right? But if they say, oh, yeah, I've really thought about this and I have an interesting reason why that's a great comp or a terrible comp, that's really
Mm,
valuable to me. So I would say you want to ask some unusual questions and push deeper and deeper into the company, the opportunity. Because at the end of the day, most meetings, like the job of any investor in this space is to say no all the time.
mm,
The question is, what are you getting out of this meeting? Are you just getting another look at something, or are you learning really interesting things about another market? I would be in meetings trying to learn about markets and then happen to fall in love with a few companies rather than always be judging a company and then see if you can backfill information about markets later, right? I'd just
mm,
always be desperately trying to learn and understand things. And then sometimes it'd be like, wow, I really think this could be something huge.
mm. I want to go back to something you said earlier, I think is relevant here. You mentioned something that you called founder startup match. In your experience, what does a great founder startup match look like? And compare that maybe to a less great founder startup match that you've seen.
One of my most recent investments was in a firm it was a new software system that is going to be a competitor to QuickBooks, effectively. More specifically, it's a competitor to QuickBooks in multi-entity asset management. Okay, you own 25 LLCs, whether those are operating companies or real estate companies, whatever. This guy discovered this opportunity because he was the number one salesman at one of the three biggest accounting software companies. And then he was a top 10 salesman at a different gigantic accounting software company.
Wow.
So he worked and performed extraordinarily well at two of his major competitors. And he said, look, I saw both of these companies get purchased while I was there. I saw the culture get destroyed, and
Mm,
I've been selling the software to this particular sub market for years. And I know that all of the products on the market suck for one reason or another. So I found a really great CTO, and we built a amazing solution specifically for that group. And that is our beachhead. And it turns out if we only live within that beachhead, could become a gigantic business. Awesome. That's a guy who, I mean, who has ever thought about accounting software for multi-asset or multi-entity asset managers? I had never
yeah.
thought about that before. But this
Yeah.
guy had spent 4 years crushing sales, 5 years crushing sales in that exact tiny niche. That's a guy who knows that space. And so that's the kind of thing you're looking for. And the short answer is if there's not a compelling personal reason why that person is the guy for that space, then I just don't believe it. I
Mm,
had another entrepreneur pitch me, hey, AI seems to be a thing. I bet there's some really data analytics stuff. I did a little bit of data analytics. I wonder if there's a company that there should be a good startup for that space. I'm thinking about starting it. No,
mm,
absolutely not. You need to be there needs to be a reason why you and no one else in the world can win in this market. I mean,
mm,
Nike was founded by a track star, a mediocre track athlete, and basically the inventor of the modern shoe, right? Like
mm,
the inventor of the modern track shoe, who was a coach at one of the most prestigious track and field programs in the world, right? That's the
mm,
kind of weird, like that's the guy to do that. That's the guy to invent that thing. Is the coach at one of the best programs in the world, right? So that's the kind of thing you want. Is there needs to be an absolutely silly reason why this person is the guy. And if there's not an
mm.
absolutely silly reason, I don't believe he's going to win because that guy is out there, and that guy is probably starting a competitor.
Matt, it's really interesting as you're talking, you know, you're a guy that makes great pitch decks all the time. And I'm here asking you about what's a great pitch deck look like. But what you're pointing to, I think, is a really interesting reality because everything that you've talked about has nothing to do with the deck. These are elements of the entrepreneur's story, their vision, their market awareness, their relevance to that opportunity. Like everything that you're pointing to I think is highlighting, for me at least, the reality that the deck and the presentation is just a window into what this company is actually doing. It's an informative window, to your point, that 90% of your gut feel is probably spot on. But I think it's a really interesting point because so many of the opportunities that hit investors' desks, it's a pitch deck shot across the bow, it's a virtual introduction, it's a demo day. Like, we get these little windows into an entrepreneur's story. But what's so important to finalizing a smart investment into what is a really risky asset class is double clicking and going behind that window to understand a little bit more what's happening underneath.
Yeah, and I think for some of these things, it's like I have the advantage of basically doing due diligence, getting paid to do due diligence on companies before they tell anybody else they're raising money. And
Mm,
so I can sometimes get in on a deal just by being there and say, wow, I actually think this is really awesome. I'll go ahead and take a check. I'll rip a check
mm,
into this. But most of the time, if you're not like a very famous angel, if you don't if you don't have a brand name, or you're not there well before they're pitching people, then it's probably not a good deal. One of my friends started making real money and he said, Matt, I want to start investing in private deals. He's a lawyer. And he said, how do I assess the deals that I'll see? And I told him, the fact that you see a deal is a fantastic signal that it's a terrible deal
hmm,
because nobody wants you on their cap table. Why would anybody want a very good lawyer in corporate law on their cap table
hmm,
generically, right? Like there's no reason they want you. And so if you see a deal, that means that all of the smart guys already passed on it.
mm,
And so I just think most people, most angels, it is going to be an absolute bloodbath because unless there is a reason why people should take their money, unless there's a reason why they're going to see a deal before everybody else sees a deal, unless there's a reason that they're deep in an ecosystem and have a truly unfair advantage, I just I think that I mean, chances are it's a bad deal. I mean,
hmm.
same with doctors, lawyers, dentists. If I see someone is raising money from a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist, I just kind of assume it's a garbage deal off the bat because those are the dumbest investors in the
Really?
world.
Because of what you talked about at the beginning, where you need to be able to, like, the best investments are the ones that you have to win your way into the opportunity to invest.
Totally. And what's the advantage of having a doctor or a lawyer on your cap table?
Mm,
There's not an advantage. You only want smart money on your cap table, people who bring strategic advantages beyond the dollars.
mm,
And if you're not an angel that brings strategic advantages beyond your dollars, and like maybe maybe you can make a case that you have differential deal flow. Okay,
mm,
maybe. But that's a very, very dangerous game to be playing. That's a very dangerous thing to hang your strategy on when
mm.
you could put all the money in the S&P and golf a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I want to do. I want to put a lot of money in index funds and I want to spend a lot of time hunting in South
Mm,
Texas. And if I can do
mm.
that, I don't know if I want to do this thing, right?
That's a really interesting point. I think part of what you're hitting on is, so the motivation for different angels. I think a lot of angels do this because they want to give back to the community. They want to help entrepreneurs. There's a range of motivations beyond pure capital appreciation and generating these heavy returns. Though I do think any investor would appreciate a good return. I think there's a huge segment of angel investors that aren't really doing this as much for the return as they are to be part of the juice and the energy and the excitement of the ecosystem. That certainly
If
varies
that's
depending on the investor, but
if that's why you're
the
doing it, start a start another company, man.
mm,
Like my dad is 65 and has started 4 new businesses in the last 4 years.
no kidding.
Yeah, because he knows commercial real estate services. He
Mm,
understands that space. He has a relationship with that space, and he did the hard work of building a team of really loyal, really talented younger people who want to work with them. And so
mm,
he's not the CEO anymore for most of these businesses, but he can pull together the company. He can see the opportunity. He has the relationships to make the sale, right? He has the set of unfair advantages in that space. But he also built a team around him where he doesn't want to be CEO of 5 businesses. He's not going to do
mm,
that, right? And so at this point, he has made he's made the money that he needs to. And so at this point, but he has that team and that stable of young talent that he's groomed for years, that he's created, that he's
mm,
helped recruit and attract and retain. And so he gets the fun of building businesses, but without the, you know, 2 a.m. call when something goes wrong. And so if you want to give back to the community, well, then teach a young buck how to do it.
mm,
Don't rip checks haphazardly into garbage deals because it was the
mm.
first decent deal you saw in 6 months, but your deal flow is bad because there's
Mm.
no reason why the best deals in the world would ever come across your desk.
Yeah. So if I had to boil that down, it sounds like some of your key advice for angels would be if you're going to invest in early stage deals, make sure that you know your value add and that you have your own way of accessing high quality deals. Don't just assume that because you're seeing something, it's a great deal. In fact, you would suggest the opposite. If you're seeing something through a public channel of any kind, really, it's probably not a good deal.
Yeah.
And you should think twice before jumping in.
Yeah, I would say that this is like it's like when people say, "How do I make a traction slide when I don't have any traction?" And my
Hmm.
response is, "Stop thinking about your pitch deck and go get traction." Right?
Mm.
Like,
Oh, I love that.
yeah, if you don't have any traction, then you're toast. If Stop thinking about whether you're picking the right deals or not. Become so extraordinarily valuable that the right deals will beg you to come onto their cap table.
Mm,
And just to be clear, I'm not that valuable yet. So I have a little
mm,
bit of an advantage in that I get to know companies weirdly well. I get paid to see deals before anybody else sees deals. Awesome. That's really valuable. That gives me a little bit of an angle. But the last company I helped that got backed by Andreessen, I said, I want to invest. And they said, we like you, Matt, but we don't love you that way. And they were right. They were
yeah.
100% right. And I said, I love this deal even more now because the
Mm,
CEO is smart enough to know that I'm not valuable. And so I would say, like, go become extraordinarily valuable. So, how am I going to
mm,
become extraordinarily valuable? Pitch decks is a nice thing to help somebody with, but that's not ever going to win me a spot on a hot cap table. How am I
mm,
going to become extremely valuable? Well, I'm working on being a really phenomenal connector. And I'm not there
mm,
yet, but my call after this is for a client who makes really awesome security robots. Well, I landed them a meeting with a friend who has a security company just for fun. I
mm,
helped them see another job opportunity. Like I didn't get paid for that. There's no value. I got nothing out of that. But if I do that and I practice doing that for a decade, then by the time I'm 31 now, by the time I'm 41, I think I'm going to be known as a really valuable connector in a certain subset of
mm,
the ecosystem. And if I'm a really
mm,
valuable connector in a certain subset of the ecosystem, I'll see more stuff. People want me. They'll say, like, I don't know exactly what Matt will do, but I think Matt will be able to help me somehow. And that would maybe that would get me enough value to win deals otherwise that I should lose. And so that's my goal. Or one of these two deals today that I looked at, I have just very good relationship with these two people. And so if either of them start this, I will have access to the deal
mm,
100% because I'm very helpful. How did I become helpful to those people? I did a lot of nice things for them without getting anything in return.
mm,
Simple as that. You just chuck value into the ecosystem for decades, and then
mm,
eventually people are like, "That's my guy. I want him on the team."
mm. I love that. Well, I'd love to hear any resources or things that you found to be super helpful over the years that might benefit our audience, if anything specifically comes to mind around pitch decks or anything we've talked about today.
In terms of pitch decks, I put out a decent amount of content about pitch decks.
Mm,
So connect with me on LinkedIn, Matt W. Gore, Optio, or connect with me on X. I'm at Goracle of Delphi. But you'll also get more of my unhinged hot takes there. So in terms of pitch decks, those are two places I would go. In terms of just general insights and learning, I am always flabbergasted when people say they're interested in a space and they don't obsessively listen to podcasts by practitioners in that space,
mm,
or if they're not part of the Twitter community around that space. There are people giving out incredible amounts of information about how they think, what they're doing, and you can just learn from other people in a shockingly easy
mm.
uh, format, and not from experts in a space, but from not from experts, right, like for journalists or whatever writing about a space, but from the practitioners. And so if you're not like, I just, man, if I want to start any kind of business or if I'm interested in a space, I can just go find the smartest people in the world talking about that space on podcasts, in newsletters, on things like that. And I am just shocked when I find out that people aren't doing that, because that is the most valuable of free information sitting there right there for you.
Who are on that vein? Who are three content creators that you're really interested in right now?
I I'm not going to say what those are. Oh well, no, I'll give one for this space. That is, I love the podcast Acquire. It is
Mm,
two practicing investors doing 4-hour deep dives on the histories of particular companies. It's not a journalist writing about business. Yeah, if you read tech journalism, it's horrible. They're always throwing rocks at people. They have because they have no freaking idea what they're talking about, and they're just writing the human interest thing. I actually love business. And so
mm,
where do I want to get my business content? From people who understand business. And so I would go, so Acquired is two practicing investors. Both were full-time VCs. At this point,
mm.
they get differential deal flow because so many people love their podcast.
Yeah.
So if I started a podcast, do you know who I'd invite onto my cap table? I would invite those guys
Mm,
because A, they're smart. B, I feel like I know them. But
mm.
C, they have audience power, right? They can
Yeah.
let people know about a new space. And so, anyways, I'm thinking about with one of these people today. We are saying, who do we want on our cap table to make this company
Mm,
succeed? And those guys would be on there because they actually understand us. So, anyways,
mm.
it depends on what you're interested in, but absolutely the nerdy deep dives by practitioners in a space is where the best information is. And if it's a little rough around the edges, that's probably better because that means other people aren't listening to it.
Love that. Well, Matt, this has been super insightful. Thank you so much for your time, your perspective. I am very much looking forward to seeing how Optio grows that next 10 years as you continue to build this connector ecosystem of yours. I think will be interesting to see where you land 10 years from now. But thanks for joining us today and look forward to catching up again soon.
Thanks, Andrew.